Canada chose 88 F-35As to replace their CF-18s in 2023. So what's this all about? Yeah, turns out it's easier said than done, just like many times before with Canadian procurement. But this time it's entirely because of the United States and its foreign policy that changes every other week. A review was initiated last year when the US was floating around the idea of invading Canada and engaging in a trade war. You can't really blame Canadians for taking that seriously. So let's just say relations between the two are at an all-time low. And the F-35 being dragged through the mud was pretty inevitable. Everyone saw that coming. Now, the current idea floating around is about diversifying Canadian fighter procurement instead of committing to a single US-centric fighter fleet. Canada has partially paid for 16 F-35As and some infrastructure is already being built for them. First deliveries are expected to be this year, with them initially based in the United States for training before arriving in Canada around 2028. And this matters a lot because any decision going ahead will be on top of an existing fleet of 16 F-35As. So we are going to look at how Canada and the US got here, and given the current political environment, how they can possibly go forward without messing everything up for the Royal Canadian Air Force. The Royal Canadian Air Force has very specific needs that are shaped almost entirely by geography. It has one of the largest airspace in the world, massive coastlines, and the Arctic region. It also has standing obligations under North American Aerospace Defense Command, which means working seamlessly with the United States to monitor and defend North American airspace. So interoperability is one of the most important metrics in Canadian fighter procurement. CF-18s entered service in the early 1980s. They performed pretty well all those years and then some. But threats have evolved, and in some sense so have the CF-18s. Despite being pretty old, they got plenty of upgrades to keep them going. The first modernization program was the Incremental Modernization Project, split into two phases. Major upgrades included a new radar replacing the APG-65 with the APG-73, a new mission computer, new IFF and radio systems, AIM-120 AMRAAMs, precision-guided munitions, Link-16, and a helmet-mounted queuing system. By 2010, all those aircraft in service were upgraded and it cost around $2 billion. The second modernization program is the Hornet Extension Program, also in two phases, with the second phase still going on. In total, 84 aircraft went through the Phase 1 interoperability upgrades, and 36 of them is now going through Phase 2 combat capability upgrades. Notable one being the new radar, the APG-79V4, a gallium nitride-based active electronically scanned array, essentially the latest generation of AESAs. These were first seen on US Marine Corps Legacy Hornets, and these radars can really make use of those AIM-120Ds Canada got previously. Kind of incredible they had the foresight to do these upgrades, otherwise the Royal Canadian Air Force would have been flying around with pulse Dopplers into the 2030s given the current situation. Now, to understand Royal Canadian Air Force and its procurement history with the F-35, we gotta go way back. In 1997, Canada joined the Joint Strike Fighter program, and later in 2002 as a Level 3 partner. Participation in such a large program was pretty good for the Canadian workforce and the aviation industry. Invested about $150 million initially during the development phase and adding more as the program matured. In 2010, Conservative government under Stephen Harper announced that the F-35 would be Canada's next fighter. It made total sense since they already invested in it. Initially, the plan was 65 aircraft with acquisition cost estimated at roughly $9 billion Canadian dollars. At the same time, in the US, Joint Strike Fighter program was essentially being restructured after increasing costs and delays. Near-term production was slowed down, an additional $2.8 billion was added to development, and the flight test program extended by around 13 months. The original approach was to build the aircraft while development was still ongoing. The US Government Accountability Office made it pretty clear that would carry significant risk, meaning early aircraft would need a lot of upgrades as the jet itself evolves. Reports through 2011 and 2012 continue to mention software maturity and mission system testing as the biggest challenges. In 2012, the Auditor General of Canada said this risk had not been clearly communicated to the Parliament and the government failed to provide complete cost information. Then they estimated the actual F-35 full life cycle cost to be around 25 billion Canadian dollars instead of the original 9 billion. There was also Lockheed Martin lobbying in the Canadian government. While it's a pretty normal thing to do across the defense industry, the optics don't look good. This is early 2010s. Canadian industries had already secured contracts worth potentially billions across the jet's lifetime, but all of those contracts were not guaranteed. Still, walking away from the F-35 would mean forfeiting those potential industrial benefits. So they were committing to an aircraft facing developmental troubles without an open competition while downplaying cost and risk that were well documented. Later, it actually became an election issue. One of the campaign promises of Justin Trudeau and the Liberal Party was not to buy the F-35, instead save the money to use on the Canadian Navy of all things. The Conservatives still maintained the position, saying the F-35 was still the best option given investments into the program. When the Liberal Party won in 2015, given the public support and the loss of trust under the previous government, a competition for the CF-18 replacement was opened excluding the F-35. An interim solution was proposed to buy 18 F-18 Super Hornets from Boeing. Well, let's just say that went really wrong. Boeing decided to do Boeing things and filed a petition against Bombardier, a Canadian aerospace manufacturer, in 2017, saying they sold Delta Airlines C-100s at an unfairly low price. Of course, US Department of Commerce backed Boeing's complaint and proposed 300% tariffs on Bombardier C-Series in late 2017. It was considered an attack on Canadian aerospace sector. In return, Canada said it won't do business with Boeing. Pretty straightforward. Either Boeing drops the filing against Bombardier, or Canada won't consider Boeing bids even in the future. Then a really funny thing happened in 2018 when US International Trade Commission ruled against Boeing, saying the CS-100s didn't hurt Boeing in any way, shape or form, because they did not produce a competing aircraft with the Delta requirements in the first place. So the tariff proposal was dropped and Boeing lost a potential Super Hornet customer for nothing. Canada then went straight to Australia to buy 25 second-hand F-18 Legacy Hornets with 18 in flyable condition for an estimated cost of around $388 million. Replacement for CF-18s was still very necessary. In 2019, Canada announced the Future Fighter Capability Project, which proposed to buy 88 new fighter jets with an open competition, with now F-35 being allowed. Primes being Boeing, Dassault, Airbus, Saab and Lockheed. Boeing came back with the Super Hornet, Airbus with the Eurofighter, Dassault with the Rafale, Saab and Lockheed with the Gripen E and the F-35. For Dassault with the Rafale, it had a disadvantage from the beginning. It had an entirely new ecosystem and was the least suited aircraft among the competitors when you consider interoperability with the US forces and NORAD. Canada's revised industrial and technological benefits policy for the Future Fighter Capability Project put even more focus on meeting security requirements associated with NORAD. Due to that, Dassault withdrew in late 2018 from the competition. For the Typhoon, the review from Airbus cited the same thing, NORAD security requirements being too much of an ask. This could be mitigated in the case of Typhoon since it had already some commonality with US weapon systems, but for the rest it would take significant effort and resources from Airbus. So in 2019, they also pulled out of the competition. Now, the Super Hornet from Boeing was rejected by Canada, simply stating did not meet their requirements. The assumption is that it failed the criteria for upgradability and sustainment over time. I kind of get the point, but Super Hornet Block 3 fixes some aspects of it. Although sustainment would still be in question since the production was on its way to a halt. I'm sure they would have extended if there was a Canadian order. As we speak, Northrop Grumman has delivered the final set of fuselage parts a few days ago. So the Gripen E and the F-35 remained. We're gonna go the whole way with it. What each aircraft offers Canada and how they stack up to each other, what Saab and Lockheed offered on the industry standpoint, and why the competition is still relevant even today. Gripen E is what came out of Saab's Gripen NG technology demonstrator program, which started in 2007. In 2016, they unveiled the first Gripen E prototype, and after a few years of development and testing, initial operating capability was achieved in 2022 with the Brazilian Air Force, perks of being an early partner in the program. Swedish Air Force, on the other hand, is aiming for a 2027 initial operating capability. From the get-go, it did not meet all metrics for interoperability and rest of NORAD requirements. Saab instead offered to modify them to integrate required comms, data links, and said it would accept the cost involved. On the logistics standpoint, it was a better offer compared to Rafale or the Typhoon because the Gripen E already had commonality of parts with US suppliers. Roughly 1/3 of the jet is American, with the rest being Swedish and European. The engine, the F414G by GE, being a major component. Product of the Joint Strike Fighter program, F-35A, is the one Canada selected for the competition of the three variants. It ended initial operating capability with the US Air Force in 2016. Both aircraft have a fully digital cockpit with sensor fusion as a core design principle. For the radars, the Gripen E comes with the Raven ESO-5, which is an active electronically scanned array based on gallium arsenide technology. It has around 1,000 transmit-receive modules and is mounted on a swash plate, giving plus or minus 100 degree azimuth coverage, so 200 degrees covered in total. That's significantly wider than a conventional fixed AESA. An advantage of that being able to fly near perpendicular flight path related to the target, maintaining radar track while also keeping aircraft target separation. For a fixed ASA, it's difficult to avoid nose-on geometries. The radar also has some low probability of intercept modes, which is common across ASAs. The F-35 comes with the APJ-T1, which is also an ASA based on gallium arsenide technology. It has around 1600 transmitter C modules, so roughly 68% more than the Raven in the Gripen E. It's a fixed ASA, but it does have a wide field of view with around 120 degrees total azimuth. The advantage of the APJ-T1 related to the Raven being higher available power and more transmitter C modules, which translates directly into radar performance. Now for the LPI modes on the F-35, the radar is not the only one with that feature. Every other emitting sensor on the aircraft is made with it in mind. The Gripen E comes with the Skyward G for infrared search and track to counter aerial threats and Lightning 5 for ground targets. F-35 on the other hand has both functions integrated into its electro-optical targeting system. In terms of electronic warfare, the Gripen E does it pretty efficiently for the jet its size. The RX's electronic warfare suite uses gallium nitride-based receivers and transmitters. GaN has become a buzzword these days, but for the right reasons. Compared to a similar sized gallium arsenide array, GaN gives better power efficiency and cooling in the same form factor. The F-35 electronic warfare suite is, let's say, naturally more powerful since it got more available power to use and the jet itself have more sensors. The NASQ-239 on the F-35 works as a part of a bigger network with the APJ-T1 radar, EOTS and the digital aperture system. Now both the Gripen E and the F-35 employs digital radio frequency memory for digital deception jamming techniques through their distributed arrays around the jet. On top of that, both have towed decoys, which is essentially a small jammer connected by a fiber optic. Bright Cloud is also available on both. It is a small jammer but it's an expendable. Yeah, Bright Cloud comes out of chaff flare dispensers. One interesting thing the Gripen E can do and the F-35 can't is cross-eye jamming, which is more commonly seen on dedicated electronic attack jets like the Growler and on some Russian jets. Cross-eye jamming tries to change the angular measurement in the vertical or horizontal plane of a missile seeker or a radar by transmitting phase coherent signals from spatially separated emitters, like from the jet's wingtips. In simple terms, it can make seekers lose their bearing, although modern ASA seekers could make it less effective. At the end of the day, jamming is a force multiplier. EW coupled with low observability gives a unique ability for the F-35 to be much closer to the threat than the Gripen E, which in turn increases the effectiveness of jamming. Don't get me wrong, as I said, the Gripen E have very good EW suit for an aircraft of its size, but it doesn't stack up well against an F-35. For missile warning, both aircraft have 360-degree coverage, Gripen E through its missile approach warning sensors and the F-35 through the digital aperture system. DAS of course have other features like it has the ability to see hundreds of miles in all directions, building a battlefield picture while also providing targeting information. And to be fair to both aircraft, even with all this, neither one is going to be anywhere close to a dedicated electronic attack platform like an E-18G Growler or the upcoming Typhoon ECR. Let's look at data links. The Gripen E uses Tactical Information Data Link System, which is the Swedish data link, and Link 16 for NATO interoperability. It's pretty good and they can transfer a good amount of information like sensor fusion data than just process track files like the old times. The F-35 on the other hand uses something called Multifunction Data Link. It's a new system itself which uses directional ASA arrays. It can send entire packets of high-volume targeting and battlefield data to other F-35s. Like for example, an F-35 flying ahead can send the entire battlefield picture to aircraft behind and they can basically act on their data and employ weapons instantaneously. For very accurate integration and to prevent errors with it, F-35s even use atomic clocks. This is not currently possible with the Tactical Information Data Link System or Link 16. Future-proofing these jets was very much considered. We have figures from the competition regarding upgradability for both, but the methodology for the scores are not mentioned. Take everything on it with a grain of salt, but the upgradability part is pretty much bang on the money. For the Gripen E, it's pretty obvious. The engines are already upgraded and there's very little space or energy for more advanced sensors. Sure, they could put a GaN-based radar, but that's about it. In the long run, that's less than ideal. F-35 on the other hand has very much room for upgrades. The engine itself, the F-135, is slated to go through a core upgrade after the adaptive cycle engine got cancelled. That's going to give more power, more range and overall more available energy to support new sensors. The software side has been a mess with Tech Refresh 3 that supports Block 4, but is still moving along. It'll bring the APJ-T5, which is a gallium nitride-based radar, new electro-optical system, Sidekick, which allows an additional 2 missiles in the weapons bay for a total of 6, NASQ-239, the AW suit is getting a massive upgrade. The cooling capacity, which is currently a bottleneck, is also being drastically increased. Almost every avionics system is being replaced with the better ones. Aside from the systems and their upgradability, kinematics and combat radius is pretty important for Canada. Both aircraft cannot supercruise. I know there's some claims going around from SAB, but the reality is Gripen E didn't demonstrate its ability to do so. In 2009, a claimed Gripen NG technology demonstrator did Mach 1.2 at 28,000 feet. But the same way an F-35 can do supercruise. Put it in afterburner and when you reach supersonic speeds, then cut the afterburner to maintain it. Not really supercruise now, is it? The Gripen E carries roughly 40% more fuel than the older C models. Still, that's just 7,500 pounds of total internal fuel capacity. Now add 3 external fuel tanks and you get an additional 7,800 pounds. That's 15,300 pounds of maximum fuel capacity. It's not much, but it's alright. The 800-mile combat radius that's advertised is in a configuration that carries 2 or 3 external fuel tanks with an air-to-air loadout of 4 radar and 2 infrared guided missiles. We can't really tell if it's 2 or 3 external fuel tanks since it has a dual pylon option that would enable to carry 4 radar and 2 infrared missiles in addition to 3 external fuel tanks. In comparison, the F-35 carries 18,250 pounds of internal fuel with a combat radius of 870 miles, carrying 4 radar-guided missiles in its internal weapons bay in an air-to-air loadout. Make that 6 missiles inside the weapons bay in the upcoming Block 4. Even though the F-35 carries more fuel internally than a Gripen E with 3 external fuel tanks, it translates to only minor range advantage over the Gripen E since the F-135 is more thirsty and pushing a heavier aircraft. Kinematic advantage for the F-35 would be massive since it doesn't have to worry about drag penalties of the Gripen E with external fuel tanks and weapons. While Gripen E is at a disadvantage in terms of range, it can work fine for Canada with aerial refueling. Canada is in the process of getting new tankers. They are buying the CC-330 Husky, which is basically a Canadian A330 MRTT. Very good pick to replace the old CC-130 Polaris, and MRTT can support boom-receptible aircraft as well as probe-equipped ones. F-35A uses the boom for refueling, but it also has the option to be equipped with the probe, while if that upgrade is happening or not is not clear with the new tanker coming. It's not all doom and gloom for the Gripen E. It has one thing going for it, and that is operational and sustainment costs, but we still need an apple-to-apple comparison. The F-35's cost per flight hour, as reported by the US Air Force and reviewed by the US Government Accountability Office, uses a very broad definition. It includes fuel, maintenance, depot-level repairs, contracted logistics, software sustainment, spare part pipelines, training systems, program office cost, and even baseline modernization, and then divides the total by fleet hours. SAB and Aviation Week put out this paper in 2023. It's a very similar metric to the F-35 calculation. It gives you around $22,000 per flight hour for the Gripen E. The F-35 is also listed at $45,000 per flight hour, which is accurate since the research was done in 2023 using data from previous years. But in 2024, according to the F-35 Joint Program Office for the F-35A, it has come down to $33,000 per flight hour. The US Air Force did set a target to reduce it to about $25,000 per hour by last year, but we don't have the data to see if that was achieved. So Gripen E still maintains an advantage on the F-35 in terms of operational cost. And for something like depot maintenance, it would hold a bigger advantage on average. And considering lifetime cost, yes, the F-35 would be more expensive. Operational flexibility is also an upside to the Gripen E. While both have the ability to land on short runways and in highways for dispersed operations, Gripen E is just superior in that regard because it's just lighter, less complex, and a bit more sturdy. They can get away with minimal crew for fast turnarounds. F-35A of course needs a parachute to do the short runway part, and needs a bit more attention on the ground with more people. After all, it's a 5th generation aircraft. Both can also operate in harsh Arctic environments without any issues. There's some misinformation out there saying the F-35 can't, well you had to consult with the Norwegians or the Finns and ask them why they chose it. Plus the US have been doing just fine in Alaska. Talking about operational needs, with US being an asshole and the sentiment to move away from them, the story of F-35 having a kill switch is making a comeback. You know, a software-based kill switch that Lockheed can just flick and everything stops working. Well, that's not really a thing and will never be a thing, especially for the F-35. Imagine if a kill switch actually exists. First, from a cybersecurity perspective. Oops, China suddenly figured out the software, by hacking into US defense industry like they occasionally do. And there goes all your F-35s. And second, suppose it's activated by the US themselves. There goes the global supply chain. US only produce around 70% of an F-35. No suppliers will be happy and the United States won't be able to fill that gap. It would take years and years to reconstitute the supply chain domestically and will completely wreck the program. Now, mission data files can also be held back by the US. It's essentially an electronic library that gets updated in certain intervals. Now, if the US suddenly stop giving these updates, you're still going to be able to operate, but a bit less prepared for new and evolving threats. But by that point, you might as well be fighting the United States. Least of your worries now, is it? Apart from that, defense contractors don't like to lose money. This will make them lose a lot of money. These guys have served under different administrations for a long time and they need to turn a profit. US cutting off logistics support would be kind of a kill switch, but the same case goes here too. It would obliterate F-35 as a program. The name Joint Strike Fighter don't just stand for the 3 variants, it also stands for the multinational effort involved in developing the thing. The choice is much as an industrial one as it is an operational one. There's benefits of buying either of them. Canada, being a Tier 3 partner of the JSF program, they are already part of the F-35 global supply chain and is projected to expand if the rest of the 72 orders go through. SAB have offered a deal if Canada buys 72 Gripen E's and 6 Global Eye airborne early warning platforms, it would support an estimated 10,000 direct and indirect jobs over time. You got to take that with a pinch of salt. For example, with Brazil, SAB initially offered around 10,000 jobs with half the fleet size compared to this offer. It ended up producing just several hundred jobs, and get this, Brazil is a developmental partner and have an assembly line. Even SAB in Sweden only have around 15,000 employees. Like, come on SAB, it's a good aircraft and I personally love the jet, but they need to stop making shit up. It really doesn't help. So if Canada really wants the Gripen E and a deal is made with SAB, the F-35 procurement would be halted with just 16 delivered. But it would affect the F-35A with increasing operational cost of having to operate such a small fleet. A more balanced approach would be buying around 36 F-35As and 52 Gripen Es. You can't go into the next few decades with too few F-35s and just Gripen Es. It's just going to be a strategic mistake. We see increasing cooperation with the Russians and the Chinese. H-6 bombers were seen for the first time in Alaskan Air Defense Identification Zone in 2024. What to say Chinese fighter jets won't be showing up. Su-57s will also appear in the near future with increasing production. Apparently United Aircraft Corporation is delivering a pretty good amount of them this year. Not too long before we see them escorting Russian bombers. Now, if you're already making up your mind about how a Gripen E can deal with them, just step back and think objectively. Of course, the United States is not helping themselves strategically by using political and economic weapons against Canada, forcing them to make bad choices. We got news a week ago with Trump threatening tariffs and decertification on Canadian-made bombardiers, and that is if Canada don't certify American Gulfstream jets. The White House did clarify they won't decertify Canadian-built planes in operation in the US. Wonder why that is? Yeah, it would be bad news for regional travel, plus there's a lot of aircrafts in US military that do important missions. Canada did say it can be resolved quickly, saying certification process was already underway and the demands were apparently recent. Might be a good example of companies, in this case Gulfstream, directly lobbying with the Trump administration to exert pressure on Canada to speed up the process. Remember, we talked about Canada ditching the Super Hornet when Boeing went after Bombardier in 2017. Trump administration has been pretty good for European defense industries, to say the least. But I personally don't think the issue this time will go as far as Canada ditching the F-35. If Canada wants complete sovereignty from US defense industry, you can't go for the F-35 and you can't go for the Gripen E. They should somehow cancel the initial 16 F-35s, very unlikely but for the sake of argument, and then buy the Rafale or get in line for GCAP, a 6th generation program. Rafale is a good pick to achieve complete sovereignty from the US defense industry, but say goodbye to NORAD commitments unless Dassault is willing to go through with interoperability upgrades. Now GCAP is so far going along very well with a prototype set to fly in 2030. That's a long time from being an operational aircraft and it's a very expensive one. Honorable mention to the Future Combat Air System or FCAS that just died. Rest in peace, Germany and France don't ever stop fighting even if a war is at your doorstep. To conclude, the Royal Canadian Air Force as it stands lacks enough pilots, maintenance and support staff. A mixed fleet of F-35A and Gripen E would make that way worse by forcing them to work on 2 completely different aircraft and their ecosystem at the same time. All the while, Canada would still remain dependent on the United States for both aircraft. The most likely outcome we see is Canada waiting it out until relations with the United States improve and then continue with the entire 88 F-35A order. Now that's it for today's video. Have to mention that we are seeing extensive military buildup in the Middle East. There is very increasing chances of US strikes on Iran in the coming days or weeks. I'll also be covering the New START treaty, which is now dead, so weekly uploads from now on. We'll see what happens.